Ah, jeez, how did I end up in the middle of the desert in nothing but my jammies? I guess you'll have to listen to the episode to find out. Procedural crime dramas have been a staple of television for decades, going back to Dragnet in 1951. These include shows like your Law and Orders, your CSIs, your Bones, NYPD Blue, The Shield, Homicide: Life on the Streets, Hannah Montana, etc. and so on. These shows are called procedurals because the storyline in each episode is basically self-contained. There may well be character details or plot lines that develop over multiple episodes or seasons, but essentially you can watch a random episode from a random season and be mostly caught up. This style of television dominated and is seen in genres from sitcoms to hospital dramas. But things started to shift in the late 90s and early 2000s. Television was starting to become more serialized. Plot and continuity between episodes and seasons started to take focus, meaning that you really wanted to see all the episodes to understand what was going on. This would only accelerate as internet streaming services like Netflix began to take over, making any given episode that you might have missed just a few clicks away, rather than requiring a DVR or a time machine. But two shows that helped precipitate this shift to long-form storytelling were The Sopranos and The Wire. Both of these highly acclaimed shows were technically crime dramas, but the long-form storytelling allowed the writers to put focus on the criminals themselves and make them central characters rather than just cases of the week. And this, in turn, would allow the dad from Malcolm in the Middle to metamorphosize into the drug kingpin Heisenberg. But would it be possible for Breaking Bad to metamorphosize into a good game? I don't know, but if you don't know who I am, then maybe your best course would be to tread lightly. Hello, and welcome to the Wireless Game Adapter Podcast, hosted by me, Oren Bishop. In this show, we take things that aren't games and try to figure out how they might be turned into games. There are 4 parts per episode. In the first part, we break down the source material a little bit and try to figure out what its main elements are. In the second part, we react to existing adaptations. In the third part, we look at games which aren't adaptations but might be catalytic to our process. And finally, in the fourth part, we try and put together an ideal solution. And remember, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the precipitate. Part 1. Crossing the Threshold. What would you do if you were a high school chemistry teacher diagnosed with cancer, pushed to the breaking point, and with no money for treatments? I mean, if you live in Canada, you're probably fine. That'll presumably be covered. But for suburban family man Walter White living in New Mexico, his circumstances and skills sent him into the drug trade, cooking really good crystal meth. I mean, I'm not a connoisseur of meth. The show implies it's good, is what I'm saying. And it's like, it's so pure that it's blue, which doesn't really make sense because really good meth should be translucent. I mean, I don't know anything about meth. I'm not into meth, you guys, but his is like super good meth. Anyway, aside from blue denoting mouth-wateringly good meth, the show also uses colors in a lot of other interesting ways. For example, the color yellow shows up a lot and denotes fear and caution. Green denotes greed and envy. Red, violence and aggression. And black is power and deception. Those are a lot of the major themes of the show right there. But the big one, I would say, is consequences. Walter White's alias name Heisenberg is ironic because of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which roughly states that you cannot know both the exact speed and position of a particle. Walter White is a clever guy, and throughout the series, he attempts to plan for every possible contingency. But time after time, he's thwarted by chaos theory. Meth finds a way. Basically, you cannot anticipate every eventuality. Pretzels! And the choices Walter makes lead to consequences for himself and the people he cares about. Also, he gets like so many people hooked on meth, you guys. And of course, hubris, which we're gonna need a little of if we're gonna try to make a game out of a television show that won 110 awards. But I'm in the Empire business, and I think we can do at least 89. Part 2: The Road of Trials. So there is not what you'd call a wealth of Breaking Bad game adaptations. There's a YouTube video of a Lego Breaking Bad video game, which sadly does not exist. There's an endless runner game called Walter Run, which, why does this exist? And there's a mobile game called The Cost of Doing Business. It feels like they put some effort into this game. Everything's told through comic panels, and you play as Jesse Pinkman, deciding whether to approach situations diplomatically, aggressively, or just jamming meth into everybody's faces until you get what you want. It's super short, but it's fun. I don't know that it feels especially Breaking Bad, though. It could be pretty much any game about a criminal. Deciding whether to approach a situation diplomatically or aggressively probably came up in the show, but it doesn't really feel like a central theme to me. And finally, I came across a free-to-play city builder style mobile game called Breaking Bad Empire Business, which actually looks like it incorporates the Breaking Bad theme pretty well. Sadly, it doesn't seem to be on the App Store anymore. Not sure if they ran into licensing troubles or something else, but I guess they weren't the ones who knock. If you haven't seen the show, that was a lighthearted joke about criminal homicide. Part 3: Transformation. In the board game Food Chain Magnate, you will build a fast food empire by carefully deciding where and when to open new locations, managing supply of your food and drink, convincing the populace that your brand is superior, and weighing the hiring and management of your employees. Replace cheeseburgers with meth and you're halfway there. In time management games such as Diner Dash and Sally's Spa, you are up against the clock trying to satisfy your customers as quickly as possible, and completing mini-games such as painting their toenails. Time pressure is often a factor in Breaking Bad, and a mini-game about making meth sounds much more interesting, and could even be used in schools to teach chemistry and arithmetic. These cover a lot of the surface-level elements of the show, but what about some of the underlying dramatic themes? In the indie video game Papers, Please, you play border security in a fictional Soviet country. Ostensibly, you're just checking people's papers to see whether they should be let in or not, but your decisions have real moral weight. You might end up separating family members from one another, or letting in a dangerous revolutionary. And all the while, you need your job to go smoothly so that you can provide for your family. Papers, Please is inspiringly good and original, and has a really great retro style reminiscent of old PC games such as Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. If you're interested in how to frame moral choices in games, you have to play it. Another great game series that really hammers home the idea of consequences, as well as not being able to control every variable, is Telltale's The Walking Dead. This game is really good at making you feel regret. I mean, in the back of your mind, you know that every choice you could have made always leads down bad ends, but it always feels like you end up finding yourself in a tailored set of circumstances that exactly punishes you for the specific choices that you made. as well as having a really great child character, which is not an easy thing to do in any medium. I don't think any piece of media has made me feel like a more terrible person. And is that not the purpose of high art? To lift the Chesterfield that blankets the collective cockroaches of our souls? Apparently not, because Joe's Apartment was completely snubbed at the Oscars.
Part 4. The Elixir.
Just because we shot Jesse James doesn't make us Jesse James, so how do we go about actually making a Breaking Bad game? Now, it's easy to think about doing a lot of the surface-level procedural elements of Breaking Bad in a tabletop game. Lots of great board games present economic systems, tension, risk, and reward, but I think where board games stumble is with dramatic consequences. There are a lot of quote-unquote storytelling board games, but they tend to have an issue with reincorporation, or rather the lack of it. For example, in Arkham Horror or Tales of the Arabian Nights, taking certain actions will involve reading cards or paragraphs to see what happens to your character. And these paragraphs can be well written, but they can't really meaningfully call back to story events that have already happened. And I think this is especially problematic for Breaking Bad's style of storytelling. If one were to do something in the tabletop space, I would go more towards some sort of communal storytelling mechanism, found in pen and paper RPGs such as Drama System, or the excellent game Fiasco, which essentially simulates a Coen Brothers style, usually crime-related story. I think by mixing in some resource management elements, you could potentially make quite a good Breaking Bad game along these lines. One problem though is that these games tend to work best when all players are mostly invested in trying to make the story as good as possible. But the themes of Breaking Bad have a lot to do with ambition and greed. So if we really want to put the player in the mindset of somebody like Walter White, I think they need to be highly motivated to win at any cost, not just motivated to tell a good story. I propose that we make this game a tycoon-style digital game, where you're trying to build an empire by carefully managing both your resources and personal relationships. But I also think the tension needs to be a lot higher than most of those games. You need to always feel like you're a couple of steps away from disaster in one way or another. Things need to go wrong, and I can't avoid those things just by loading a recent save, because the decisions that led to that disaster were little seeds I planted hours ago. And when you're wrapped up in these sorts of complex moral choices, there is no win-lose. And when you're in this business, every decision leads to blood on your hands, figurative or literal. And I want my gosh darn myth-making minigame, because learning can be fun. I'd say you should even throw in some chemistry puns for good measure, but all the good ones are gone. You've been listening to the Wireless Game Adapter Podcast, hosted by me. Now, say my name, and check out Steampunk Rally and many other addictive games at Roxley.com, but just say no to crystal meth. Music for this episode was used under the Creative Commons license from Incompetech.com. You heard Neo Western, DD Groove, and Thief in the Night, all by Kevin MacLeod. Theme music is Chibi Ninja by Eric Skiff. Tell me what you want adapted next at orenbishop.wixsite.com/game design, and follow me on facebook.com/orenbishopgames. Tell your local drug dealer about this podcast. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go hang out in the desert in my jammies. Yes, science!